So let me call to order the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting of January 10th, 2024. Sounds odd saying 2024, but I managed to get it out without slipping it up. Let's start in the usual fashion with the meeting agenda. I'm going to do a quick screen share of that agenda. And I have two small changes to propose. One is that we go ahead and just pull the approved minutes up after follow-up items and liaison reports rather than saving it for the end of the meeting. I think that'll be quick and routine and might as well just get that done and out of the way before we get into other things. And the other change relative to what's printed on the screen is that we're going to do DPW on February 7th rather than tonight. So the last item, the DPW item, isn't going to happen tonight. So those are two changes I wanted to propose. Anybody have any other changes to propose before we accept the agenda? Okay, if not, I would welcome sorry, I'm just doing a quick Zoom adjustment here. I would welcome a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
And quick roll call. Nora.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Shelley.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
Mike F.
Aye.
Wasim.
Aye.
And I'm aye as well. So that gets us 9-0 for the agenda. Great. Okay. So then just jumping in with liaison reports. I've got one item I can share about school stuff, just kind of a quick update there, and then see if anybody else has anything they want to bring in. As I think we talked about last time, Mike, Paul, and I have a meeting set up to see Dawn Fattore, who's the business manager of the schools, on Friday. So we're going to meet with her Friday morning and talk about budget stuff. I think we sent a document over to her earlier in the week with kind of laying out for her the state of play of Sherborn budget and how we're getting closer and closer to Prop 2.5 limits, along with some specific questions about particular budget items and things for both the regional schools budget and Pine Hill budget. I had a chance for a long delayed meeting to meet earlier this week with the chair of Dover, the Dover Warrant Committee, to just exchange notes on schools. So we agreed that we're going to meet with Dawn. The Dover people are going to meet with Dover Warrant's going to meet with Dawn Fattore sometime later, and we agreed that end of January or early February we would all get together. Mike, Paul, I think that would hopefully include both of you, to just kind of compare notes with how did things go with conversation with Dawn. What are the issues that we want to talk about at the February 14th meeting when advisory and Dover Warrant jointly meet with the school committees. So just kind of a quick update on where things stand on liaison and connecting with folks on the school budget. Anybody else with liaison reports that they wanted to share? Paul, go ahead. And I should have said, Paul, Mike, please jump in on school stuff if there's anything else that you wanted to add to what I just said.
I don't have anything on that, but I wanted to give a quick update about a meeting I had with the chair of the Recreation Department, Dave Goldberg, on January 5th. And basically, his operating budget is pretty boring in a good way, in that it's all flat, 0% and $0 increase, the same as last year, right? The more interesting or exciting things that Dave will be bringing is more his fiscal year 25 capital requests. So it'll be kind of reviewed as part of that. We had a good discussion. It sounds like Recreation does a good job of being fiscally responsible kind of year after year. They get money from the operating fund, from a revolving fund where they get some revenue from field rentals and fields for program participants and such, right? So it seems like they do a good job of using different levers to try to stay flat. Right? So just an update on what we'll see from the recreation.
What's the capital budget item that you mentioned?
There are two capital budget items. One is a update and redo of the largest baseball field, I think one of the Jameson fields. And another one is for a landscape design of a tennis pickleball court in town, right? So those are two of the rec items that'll be in the capital budget.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Paul.
Sure.
Anybody with anything
gonna-
else?
I have a question. Are they gonna build new racquetball courts? Is that what you said?
No, I think it's just for the landscape design part of understanding what the design might look like for renovating the tennis court, and then in the area of the tennis court, kind of to the right, like where there's a bounce back wall, they have a notion of repurposing that to be permanent pickleball courts. Because I guess now, I guess they can put up kind of temporary pickleball courts, but they have to reconfigure the tennis, the pickleball, if you will. So they're looking to do a design to update the tennis court that periodically needs to be updated, and then do the design work for the pickleball. I don't know if Jeremy has more on that. If you have any information.
I was just gonna say before I turn it over to Jeremy, I think we'll hear more about that in a couple of weeks at our next meeting when they'll be here to present. They're not on the agenda for tonight, but they will be, I think, in a couple of weeks. Jeremy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna just add a little more color to that, but if you want to wait until your next meeting, that's fine.
Okay.
It's my understanding that they're funding this design out of their revolving fund, such that it would inform a full capital request for the construction this spring. That's my understanding of their capital request for the courts, to add pickleball courts.
Okay, good, thanks. And I should have mentioned at the outset, thanks to Shelley. She's up for minutes tonight and graciously agreed to do that. If you're wondering why I didn't do the usual, who's going to take minutes. We got our rotation. We're in easier shape on that. Anything else on liaison reports? Okay. Then let's go to minutes. Let me pop those up on the screen. And as I said, I think we can do this pretty quickly. I hope we can do it quickly. Okay, so those should all be visible. And I will do the usual, just scroll through. If anybody has corrections, suggestions, anything that should change, just chime in and we'll adjust as needed before hopefully approving these. Anybody have anything that should get updated or changed? If not, I would welcome a motion to approve as shown on the screen.
So moved.
Great, okay. Okay, quick roll call. Nora,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Shelley.
Aye.
All right, thanks. Mike W,
Aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Ben,
Aye.
Mike F.
Aye. Aye.
And I'm I as well, so 9-0 for approving minutes. Okay, so let me get that out of the way. All right, excellent. Okay, so now we come to the main topic of tonight's meeting, which is our first round of budget review. I wanted to make just a few general comments to kind of set that up, and particularly for new members of advisory, just kind of describe the process of what is it that we're trying to do tonight and how does that relate to what we'll be doing when we get to the public hearing. Then Jeremy's going to, right, he and Deb put together this very nice roll-up of the budget. So Jeremy's gonna walk through the budget big picture. And then, we come to thinking about budgets of individual departments. And I think in a way we should do that in a couple pieces. One piece is we don't necessarily have to talk about every budget. Some of these are probably completely non-controversial. There are others, I'm sure, where either I or others have particular questions. So I think one thing is to, take care of particular questions about individual budgets and make sure that we get whatever information we want and whatever feedback we might have to give back to budget makers, that we do that. I also think, as we're going to hear from Jeremy's setup, that as we get closer to Prop 2.5 limits, it becomes important for advisory to also think about and discuss just big picture with the roll up of the budget. Is it landing in a place that we as advisory are comfortable with, or is that not the case? And if not, in what way and what feedback might we provide? So I think we'll want to do both of those things when we come to talking about particular budgets. In terms of process, tonight we're not voting on anything with these budgets. This is just a conversation. Really appreciate the folks from Town Hall who are here and are available to answer questions and provide additional information for us. I think on some of the larger budgets, folks from Town Hall will actually do a presentation. On others, they're here and available for us to answer questions. But our real goal for tonight is to make sure that we understand each of these budgets, that if we have questions, ask them, get them answered tonight or with follow-up. And if we have concerns or feedback to deliver back to Jeremy and budget makers, this would be a good time to do that. Again, we're not voting on anything tonight. This is just conversation, information gathering, kind of a chance for advisory to sort of get a sense of how do we feel about things, and to convey that back to Jeremy, Deb, and budget makers. When we get to the public hearing in March, that's when advisory actually votes. The budget, every warrant article advisory will take a public position on. Every member of advisory will be voting and taking a public position on every item on the town warrant. And on the budget will come up, and advisory could just, we're good with the presented budget. We approve that. That's what we want to send forward to town meeting. Or advisory members could call hold on budgets of particular departments with, hey, there's still outstanding concerns or things that we want to talk about, or bring forward for the public in the public hearing for discussion. And then as advisory, we can then either choose to approve the budgets as presented at the public hearing, or decide that we want to go in a different direction in terms of what we're going to bring forward to town meeting. So again, I want to just go through that because it's really at the public hearing that each member of advisory needs to be prepared to take a public position on the budget as a whole and specifics implicitly each specific department budget, with the opportunity to have discussion about particular budgets there if we want, or not, if everybody's pretty comfortable with where each budget landed. So again, tonight it's just information and kind of sharing reactions and impressions. I think that'll help all of us on advisory coalesce around kind of a perspective, and I think will be really useful for the folks in Town Hall who very kindly are joining us tonight. Okay, so that's my setup. Let me, Jeremy, pass it over to you. I have docs if you'd like me to share anything, or if you want to, I can probably give you permission to do that.
I have several slides that I would like to go through. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. So let's see here. I probably have to make you a co-host for you to be able to share.
I think I might be able to. I see the.
Okay, give it a shot. Give it a shot. My screen was suggest. Oh, perfect. Okay, that's going to work great. Excellent. Okay, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. We just wanted to, after observing last year's budget cycle, I didn't catch all of it last year, but I caught, I don't know, maybe 50% of it or so. After observing that, and also just some experience I've had in other communities and other roles, Dan and I and others have chatted about, what we might be able to do to help give more information to advisory and the select board to help inform their decisions and recommendations to town meeting. in addition to all the detailed budgets that you'll get this year, I put together a budget roll up, early on, so you could see how all of the submitted budgets sort of fit together, and also took the opportunity to update the budget model, and create a new budget model that I liked for several reasons, and we can talk about it more. But the budget model, the new one that's been included in the memo that was sent around to all of you folks, the cover memo, the budget model, and also some analysis of financial indicators. All that information is available, and I'll touch on some of those things. But feel free to ask any questions on any of that information later on. But the updated budget model I like because it shows all of what goes into a budget, not just the expenses, but also the revenues. You don't have a budget without those two sides, and ultimately it does need to be balanced. And balanced, can mean a couple different things in municipal budgeting. And I'll mention that a little bit later as well. And also the budget model, not only does it have the expenses for the department expenses included in the model, but it also has the financial articles that are approved at town meeting in addition to the operating budget that have an impact on the town's finances. And there's also things that don't have action at town meeting that actually kind of end up being part of the budget. There's overlay, and there's state assessments and things that are technically part of the budget, not voted at town meeting. They don't need to be voted at town meeting, but are part of the budget in its entirety. So that's all presented in that updated budget model. Just to give a little background and context about Sherborn and Sherborn's government structure. Many of you folks know this, and maybe might add a little color to those that know some of this. But Sherborn does not have a town charter. Many communities do. A charter is what sets up the government structure for a community. Without a charter, Sherborn's structure kind of defaults to what Mass General Law says a town should be. But Sherborn does have a set of bylaws that are voted and approved at town meeting that does give a little color to town finances, but in reality is fairly silent on budget preparation and who does what and how it comes together. In the town bylaw, the town administrator is hired under contract by the select board to oversee the select board office and all the departments that come underneath that. I also serve as the procurement officer. I have the authority to enter contracts if there's prior funding in place per the town bylaw. Along with the finance office, I approve all payments, warrant payments for bills. I supervise the department heads. I'm asked to have effective relationships with town boards, departments, commissions, and committees, even if they don't directly roll up to the select board office. And the bylaw also mentions that the town administrator is responsible for the maintenance, repair of town buildings, facilities, and property. It's actually, there's really no language in the bylaw regarding development of budgets or presentation of budgets, but I'm very happy to do that. And it's a little different than I've seen in other communities. But there's also a section in the town's bylaw about the finance director and our accountant, Deb. She managed the cash flow. She does help with forecasting of revenue and expenditures and coordinates financial information. And she is available, directly from by the advisory, by the select board, and on a day-to-day basis, she reports to the town administrator. And of course, you folks, the advisory, the bylaw describes your duties as annually receiving expenditure estimates from town boards, officers, and committees, and the school department. You must have a public hearing on the warrant, all warrant articles, in addition to the budget. Any warrant article that goes to town meeting, you are required or asked to provide a recommendation for town meeting. And then you're also required to put together an advisory report with those recommendations so many days ahead of town meeting, and it does typically list your recommendations for expenditures. So by the town's bylaws, the budget roll-up can sometimes just happen at the end unless we take the effort to help pull it together earlier so you see the big picture. And hopefully that's what we're going to help you do this year. In addition to the town's bylaws, the town did adopt, the select board and advisory did adopt financial policies in 2021. Those are available on the website and a little more detail there. They don't actually get into detail about how to develop budgets and who's responsible to do what in the budget development process, but it does give some sort of guiding principles on fiscal policies. And they're here and also, in the text of those financial policies. Administer a revenue system that's equitable, reliable, diversified, and sufficient. Prioritize services and appropriate service levels for town services. Administer the expenditure of resources to assure fiscal stability and efficient delivery of services. It says that budget planning and control is continuous. It's not once a year, it's a year-round activity. That the town should review its capital equipment and infrastructure and set priorities for replacement, have a capital plan. And it also talks about, and there's a separate policy on reserves as well, but that the town shall maintain reserves, contingencies, and fund balances sufficient to protect the town's credit. The town is fortunate and has an excellent credit rating. So if the town does need to borrow money, you get the best interest rate available on the market. It's important to keep that, as well as have reserves to protect against any financial downturns and emergencies. So you also annually, the advisory puts out a guidance letter. This year, your guidance letter was a 3.5% COLA for municipal employees. Those are folks that are non-union employees. So it would cover just about all municipal employees on the town side, with the exception of the police officers and public works laborers. But generally, everybody else would fall under that, unless they have a standalone contract that says otherwise. But many of those contracts are tied to the COLA. And then you also put out sort of a request or expectation or a goal to level fund the expenses, but to provide level services and identify where when the expenses needed to go beyond, higher than a level fund, what those costs would be to provide level service. And so that, we did, Deb, Diane, and I did meet with all of the budget makers in December, early December through December, after your budget guidance went out, to sit with them as they submitted their budget requests. And we did roll that up and put it into the new model. And helped the budget makers, remind them of the guidance policy, the guidance that you folks put out and what your expectations are. But again, in Sherborn, the town administrator doesn't have the authority. It's not my budget that's being submitted. I'm hoping roll up this budget. Technically, I don't have the authority to create and submit a budget, but I'm helping you compile it in a holistic way. And happy to do anything else, in relation to that, that the advisory or the select board may wish me to do. So with all that budget roll up, the budget model summary is on the screen here, divided out, showing education, showing town government. Town government is like general town government, police, fire, public works, and undistributed expenses. I listed out undistributed expenses separately because that actually ties in expenses that are related to both. There's nothing, a lot of these undistributed expenses sort of are general in nature and are hard to attribute to a specific department. So we account for them in the aggregate. And there are expenses in undistributed expenses that are attributed to the education component. In particular, the teachers at Pine Hill School, their benefits are part of the town's benefits. So their health insurance would be covered under this budget here, not in the school budget. There's also debt service for certain school projects that's in that as well. But by way of what was submitted from the school department for Pine Hill, They're proposing an 8.13% increase over FY '24. On the screen here, you see what their budget was approved at the last town meeting for FY '24, the current fiscal year. It's got a column as well for the draft FY '24, what's been submitted thus far, the dollar change year over year, and the percentage change. Regional schools submitted their version, and they called it the version 1.0. For the regional schools was an increase of a little over 6%. And town government, all of the town departments, committees, commissions, police, fire, public works, town buildings, that rolls up under town government, and as submitted now, it's at a 3.73% increase, which from that number is not all that far off from your guidance. Just from a 3.5% COLA, which the salaries account for about 70% of the town government expenses, and some cost inflation. And I can get in a little more detail on that later. And undistributed expenses, health insurance, that's the benefit that town employees receive. Currently, our providers projecting an 8.5% increase for our health insurance. And that's $145,000 increase for FY '25. We also are obligated to provide an annual assessment payment to the Middlesex County Retirement System. That is to fund there's an unfunded liability from older employees. Newer employees actually fully contribute to their retirement. It's the older employees or folks that have already retired that contributed in a lower percentage than current employees do, that there's an unfunded liability there that this assessment helps make up. But that assessment has gone up 6% per year and is going to continue that. That's the plan that's required of them by the pension regulatory folks at the state. And debt service is in the undistributed expenses. This is what is already approved debt service. Since all of your debt, the practice has been to vote it as a debt exclusion. It's not really part of your budget calculation for your levy limit. It gets added onto afterwards. So what's shown here for debt service is already approved. It does not include what is proposed at the upcoming town meeting, in that that doesn't have an effect on the levy limit because it's additive to that. But when we talk about capital, we'll be happy to tell you what the added, the additional cost of approving those capital items would be for the community. So overall, the town budget currently as proposed is a 5.68% increase, or a $1.8 million increase from 2024 to 2025. And certainly, it kind of shows here a 1.8 million, about 1.3 million of that is attributed to the school departments. So you wouldn't have a budget without a revenue component as well as expenses. So to fund those expenses, the sources of revenue that the community has are property taxes, your tax levy, that counts for about 90% of your revenue. There's also local receipts, which are fees and registration fees for vehicles, other fees that are collected. And that's a relatively small percentage, in that your community doesn't have a whole lot of commercial and industrial other uses other than residential. So your local receipts are relatively small, about 3 to 4% of your budget. And then also state aid. So state aid is two components: is unrestricted government aid, which is just general aid that comes from the state that can be used for anything. And then there's also the school Chapter 70 aid. What's shown on the screen here is the combination of both. And in the model, we've forecasted, and we may need to keep an eye on this, but for local receipts, we've forecasted 2% increase year over year. as well as the same 2% for state aid. Unfortunately, just recently, the governor's announced 9 seat cuts to the state government for this current fiscal year, FY24. And that means that they're cutting the current fiscal year budget. Currently, they're not expected to touch the school aid or local aid. However, it has happened in the past. Sometimes when they start doing these ICC cuts, they have to continue doing that. And towns have to find and do a correction in a budget year it's currently happening. But what it does, it doesn't bode well for FY25 to see an increase in state aid for next year. So that 2%, when we put it in, we thought it was sort of conservative, but it might not be. And yes, the budget as presented is balanced. It's balanced in that the town has the ability to provide the revenue to offset its expenses, but to do that, your local receipts are what they are. There's some things you can do to change that, but most things don't move the dial that much. State aid is just that's what they give you by formula. The only way to make up the difference is for your tax levy, your property tax levy. So to fund this budget and the budget increase of 1.8 million, the general property tax levy would go up 5.8%. And folks will say, I thought Prop 2.5 limited my taxes. They can't go up more than 2.5% per year. Well, that is not entirely true. And hopefully the next slide will help with that. So how does Prop 2.5 work? So Proposition 2.5 is by law it governs the way that municipalities can raise property taxes. But that 2.5% is based on the prior year levy limit. It's not based on the actual levy that was administered. It's not the actual taxes that were paid by folks. It's this levy limit calculation. So the levy limit is the levy limit you start with from the last year. You add the 2.5%, and that's the Prop 2.5. 2.5% increase over the levy limit of the prior year, and then you add new growth. And new growth is new construction, like added building additions, new homes, new construction, not escalation in your assessment. It's an actual improvement done, and that'll change your levy limit. Those two things are what change your levy limit, and those two things only. This calculation here is for FY24, what we're planning for next year. So starting with FY24's levy limit, 28,916,000, add 2%, add the new growth. New growth is an estimate. We're estimating a new growth for FY25 of $218,000. There are some clouds on the horizon for that new growth. Our building permits count for the calendar year 23 is lower than it has been in the past, and that's not boding well for new growth. In that new growth, you track it by your building permits. Somebody needs a building permit to build a new whatever. So that 218 is in the average of what we've seen in the last years, but we need to keep looking at that number as well. So then that sets the levy limit. So the levy limit for this coming year is 29,857,000. And then you add the debt exclusions that I talked about earlier, and that gives you your maximum allowable levy. And then whatever is your actual levy. So the actual levy is what your budget is. And right now, this budget for FY25 is proposing an overall budget of the 31,892,000. When you subtract the 2, and you get what's called the excess levy capacity. And that's an important number. That number means you're $122,000 away from your levy limit. You're that far away from having Proposition 2.5 control your year-over-year budget increases. So the reason why this budget can be financed, you have the revenues available by way of raising your property taxes by 5.8%, is that you're using up this levy capacity. So this levy capacity kind of carries forward or goes away. And here's the history of your levy capacity from FY19 to current and the current proposed budget. You can see that back in 2019, your excess levy capacity per that calculation I just talked about was over $800,000, and it was growing, got up to $1.6 million in excess capacity in FY22. But since then, it's been getting smaller and smaller pretty quickly. And that reduction in excess levy capacity is what's been funding your budgets in the last several years. So if this budget as presented is approved, your excess levy capacity would be just over $100,000. So then going into FY26, the year after this coming, you would only have that $122,000 plus 2%, 2.5% plus new growth. That would be the increase you could have in your budget into going into FY26 without having to do an override. If we were proposing the same budget for FY26, you would need an override to do it. You wouldn't be able to fund this budget with such a small amount of levy capacity, because as proposed, this budget uses up a little over $800,000 in excess levy capacity. So moving on from that, I can answer questions on that a little bit later after I get through these. As presented, the FY25 budget, kind of the pieces of the pie that different departments and functions get. 58% directly to the schools. However, they also are some of the insurance and benefits and debt is also attributed to school functions. And that's highlighted down there on the right. About 25% of the overall town budget is for town budgets, town general government, public works, public safety, police, fire. Insurance and benefits make up about 11% of your budget. Debt and interest, 5.3% of your budget, which compared to other communities is actually pretty good. Some other communities have a higher percentage of debt in relation to their budget. And actually down there, that state assessments at 0.3%, that's one of those budget items that you don't vote at town meeting. It just gets taken out. So state aid is given to us and they take some out of it. So the state gives and the state takes away. But those state assessments are taken right off of your state aid, and it's highlighted on the cherry sheet. A little more detail on the expense summary. Again, this is showing the overall budget increase in dollars and percentage from FY24 to FY25. Schools on the top. Town government, including police, fire, public works. And I've divided out here the dollar amount that's attributed to salaries and the dollar amount attributed to expenses. Again, salaries account for about 70% of the town government budgets. The other 30 is the expenses. And certainly that the 3.5% COLA is accounted for in that $214,000 increase in salaries. And then undistributed expenses, which I went through previously. And the actual dollar amount increases there attributed to those expenses. So from a big picture, some of just focusing on the town government things again, town government being general government, police, fire, public works, some big budget drivers to consider or just to be aware of in this budget. The 3.5% salary adjustment for non-union employees. Actually, you wouldn't think it, but one of the departments that affected the biggest by that is the fire department. They have one of the higher salary lines. And they're non-union. Longevity pay, that was a program that was approved last year at town meeting, is now incorporated in the budget. The first year was funded by free cash, and now that's incorporated into each department's budget. In the select board budget, we've proposed an increase to the senior tax credit program. That's an additional $5,500. We've also moved forward, and I see Pam is here, as you can give a little more detail on that if you'd like. But we've moved forward to combine the offices of the treasurer and collector in the FY25 budget. You'll recall last town meeting, it was approved to combine those two offices into one appointed position. The special legislation that's required is before at the State House, and we're optimistic that'll be approved before too long, and thought it best that we start planning for that combined office. This is one that does one better than your guidance. It actually is a budget reduction of like $35,000 budget reduction, and also it removes a benefited position. And the budgets also fund the conservation agent and town planner positions with our efforts that were budgeted, but also based on the current market rates for those positions. Funds the obligations of the current police officer contract. We've also built into this budget, you'll see in the ambulance budget line, a fairly big increase, and that's actually due to really what's a structural budget deficit that is worthy of correcting. So the ambulance services is made up of two different budgets. There's a revolving account, and then there's a budgeted line item in the operating budget. That revolving account, revolving fund, the revenue anticipated has been overestimated for several years, and there's been a makeup appropriation ongoing. It seems like every year, every other year. That's really a structural budget deficit that you're making up the cost of services after they're done. It's not ideal. And especially when you're getting closer to your levy limit, it's something that should be corrected before you don't have the ability to correct it. So there's a correction to the forecasted revenue in that revolving account by, I think it's $35,000. So that revenue that could have been coming from the revolving fund that's not coming from it is now put into the tax levy budget. There's some assumptions for the Public Works Union negotiations. Their contract ends at the end of this June. There's about 7 or 8 laborers and foremen that are in that union. So we have some assumptions in the budget for that contract. The Board of Health is requesting some additional hours for an administrative assistant. And the Recreation Commission budget, even though it is level, does propose to combine 2 part-time positions into 1 position, which would make that position benefit eligible. That's the salary side. And on the expense side, some budget drivers. The assessor's budget includes some costs to update the parcel database and map each year. Wendy did receive a grant like 5 years ago or so for about $10,000. She's now exhausted that grant. Now we need to continue doing this work, but need to request funds to do so. The accounting budget includes the OPEB audit, which is done every other year. The elections budget includes expenses for the 2024 presidential election, which the clerk is expecting to be fairly busy. Information technology includes the costs for cybersecurity and software licensing, municipal energy costs for electricity and natural gas. Dan sent around the analysis that we did that incorporates the contracts for supply, which helped mitigate the budget by over $30,000 by those supply contracts. And there's also in the town building budget, there's additional requests to maintain the library in a state of good repair now that it's complete and soon to be turned over fully to the town. There are annual maintenance items that the town should do. The fire department budget includes medical exams for firefighters, some corrections to officer stipends, solid waste disposal, and the recycle processing and transfer operations are all vendor services that we need to enter new contracts into the next year. So we've got assumed some costs there for FY25. And then the Council on Aging has some additional expenses for a program they've started this year called the Sit and Sit program, with some rental costs for the room that they require. I think we've covered this one. And as I mentioned earlier, in addition to the department budgets that are voted at town meeting, there's other financial articles that are voted at town meeting. So the model and the memo that's been distributed puts out a plan for the use of other funds to add additional funds to the OPEB trust, the other employment benefits liability that the community has. I think it's around $12 million of liability thus far. Now we're for a number of years now, we've been required to account for it on our financial statements, and we set up an OPEB trust a number of years ago and have been contributing to it. The fund balance in the OPEB trust, 1.8 million in one account and another almost million in a different account. But each year we've been contributing $200,000 towards that. This budget continues that trend to help reduce that unfunded liability. General stabilization, we're proposing, just like last year, another $50,000 into that stabilization account. The current balance is just shy of $1 million. We're proposing some additional funds into the capital stabilization fund, and that fund currently has $263,000 in its balance. There's really no ongoing revenue source into the capital stabilization fund other than these appropriations. So it's not really a sustainable stabilization fund as of yet. And then also the capital budget that you'll hear later utilizes $348,000 of free cash to fund capital items. And just a history of your reserves and what the policy requires, the financial policies, reserve policies require. On the left there, you can see the green line is the combination of free cash and the stabilization fund. Those both count towards the town's reserves, and that's measured against the overall town budget. So it's good that you've got reserves of about 10% of your budget. That's good. And the fiscal policies do require that the stabilization fund have a minimum of 2% of your operating budget and target 3%. And you see that red line. You haven't quite got to the 3, but you're over the 2. So you're trending towards meeting the target for the stabilization fund. And the free cash minimum of 3%, you do meet with this proposed budget. You don't meet the target of 5% after utilizing the funds. And relating to your budgets you're talking about tonight, just a quick summary of if we think they meet your guidance, and if they don't, what they don't meet. So the assessor's budget, I've mentioned the parcel updates and the cost. Treasurer collector budget meets your guidance, probably exceeds your guidance because it's a budget reduction. Finance and accounting, with the exception of the additional cost for the OPEB audit, meets your guidance. Advisory committee, town clerk, meet your guidance. Elections and registration, the presidential election has some additional costs that we need to account for. Town buildings is all expenses. There's no salaries in this budget. And there's additional expenses anticipated to keep the town hall HVAC and alarm system in a state of good repair, to provide potable water to municipal buildings in light of the PFAS issue and the water supply. And then there's additional funds to help maintain the library based on what the architect and the OPM are suggesting is the proper way to go forward for maintenance contracts. And solid waste, there's some accounting for those vendor contracts I mentioned earlier. And we also have an obligation to test the landfill. There's groundwater monitoring wells and natural gas collection wells that we have to hire an environmental consultant to monitor. The Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection has added another testing requirement to the groundwater testing. They're requiring us to test for PFAS. That PFAS testing will cost us another $15,000 per year. The recycling budget, cemetery budget, and veterans budget meets your guidance. And the historical commission meets your guidance with the exception of they'd like to add a 5th district sign. They installed 4 last year. There's one site that's missing that they would like to fill in. I guess one thing to note on the cemetery budget, it's got a potential budget impact in a good way. Traditionally, the cemetery commission has used outside vendors to conduct burials, to dig grave sites, to the tune of folks would pay about $200,000 to $20,000 a year to that outside vendor to dig those. So we're exploring with the commission and with Public Works doing that with Public Works folks. Sean believes the frequency is about 2 per month. It's not really that much that he can account for that within his current workload. And instead of that $20,000 going to an outside vendor would be another source of revenue for the town. So that would just go into the general fund, that $20,000 in fees. That would become part of your local receipts. So we're optimistic that's going to work out. And that's what I got for you, Dan.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. That that is terrific. Doing the roll up and getting the big picture at the beginning of the process is just super helpful. And really appreciate the effort that you put into this and others working with you in town hall put into this doing it. I think it makes it possible both for us here and I hope for the select board to kind of have the big picture in mind from the very beginning, which I think helps inform discussions about particular department budgets. So I want to suggest that first we start with any questions for Jeremy about what he presented. Then we see if there's any conversation to have, just big picture. What are people's reactions to sort of top line numbers and where we are relative to Prop 2.5 limits, excess levy capacity numbers that Jeremy showed in that pretty dramatic chart. And then we continue with then specific questions and discussions about individual departments. So if that's good with everybody, why don't we start with any questions for Jeremy about what he presented, and then we can get to kind of big picture reactions to the kind of headline numbers. Paul, you want to start?
Sure, and thanks very much, Jeremy. I appreciate all that. One kind of clarifying question. I wonder, for salaries, is the overtime expense line item that I saw in some of the budgets, is that in the salaries budget or is that separate?
It should be in the salaries budget.
The salary budget. Because the color behind my question is, like, I'm wondering if we can think of overtime as a lever within the budget in terms of saying trade-off kind of overtime expense for maybe projects take a few days longer type of thing. It was kind of the like, but thanks. I think you answered my question that it's in that salaries but line item somewhere. Thank you.
Anybody else with specifics for Jeremy? It's a great presentation.
Well, I guess I have a question. You said, was it recreation wanted to make 2 part-time people a full-time person? Are we discussing that now, Dan? Or
So recreation, their budget's going to come up. I think it's on the 24th in 2 weeks. So if you want to offer a general reaction to that, that's great. But you know, the time when folks from recreation will be here to talk about why they want to do it, what the rationale is, that conversation is really going to come up in more detail in a couple of weeks.
okay.
So what about just since Jeremy did this very nice roll up and we can kind of see what this proposed budget would imply in terms of the diminishment of the excess levy capacity, the numbers of the roughly 5.8% increase in the tax levy would translate into an average increase in everybody's property tax bill of 5.8% because it just goes directly there. So reactions to kind of headline numbers and how the roll up looks, big picture thoughts. Pen, you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I've been mulling some of this over for a while, of course, and also digesting that Jeremy's presentation, which was terrific, and possibly horrific, but certainly terrific. So I've been thinking for a while, and I've been involved in, so these are some big picture thoughts. I don't think how we've been doing things is sustainable, and I think things are looking worse on that front. I'm alarmed by the idea of hitting the override limit. I think that something to keep in mind is, we can talk about 5.8%, but if you divide it by the amount, the dollar amount by the number of households, that's an increase of about $1,200 per household on average. I think the other thing that I've been sort of seeing and a lot of Jeremy's presentation crystallizes is there's kind of a weird vacuum in Sherborn in terms of like who's responsible for what. And I think it kind of comes down in terms of, so I think the town does a really, overall, for sure, does a really good job of saying, these are the services we have, this is how we provide them, this is how we pay, how we budget them. But there seems to be a lack of a vacuum in the middle of oversight. And I think that's us. And I think that it falls to us, seemingly, to be sort of the reality check in the process. And I think that the way we've been doing it has been level fund with bumps up as necessary to provide level services. I'm gonna suggest that going forward, we think about reconsidering that and actually looking at a genuine level funding model rather than a level services model. Because in theory, with any government, you can always keep going to the well for more money, but there are consequences to that. There are consequences to the taxpayer, there's taxpayers, there's consequences to the town if we need an override. We're on a path of, we keep spending money we kind of sort of don't have. And I think we're in trouble and we're getting ourselves into deeper trouble. And I think we need to rethink our basic model and be willing to say to various departments, I'm sorry, we don't have the money to do that. You have to figure out another way to do it, or you just have to do less. And along those lines, I think the things that we've gotten in trouble with, and I'm worried about, are things that are basically forever costs. So the library is done, and now we're seeing a big jump in maintenance costs there. That's a big, beautiful building, but all of a sudden now it's got to be staffed. Now it's got to be heated. Now it's got to be maintained. Another one that's looming on the horizon is the Central Dispatch Center, which is a good thing and solves a lot of problems. But one of the things that we should all keep in mind is that's being paid for currently with a grant. But that grant is going to be reduced very quickly over time. And within a 3 years, the full cost of that, which currently is $342,000 a year, is going to be borne by the town. So that's going to be a fairly big line item that's going to get added down the road. We may have to rethink what we do with that. But we have these costs that, the pension, we have things that Jeremy mentioned, we have things that we can't, we have no control over or limited control over. And I think we should be very, I know we're going to get into the specifics, but I think we should be very leery about, for example, adding benefited positions, even if there's a net reduction in overall in salary. There are down the road costs, and I think that we need to pay attention to those as we look forward. And I do think I raise my hand saying I think we should be willing to reconsider the basic model of level services and finding a way to pay for them, because we've been doing that and we're not on a good path with it. And whether you look at the override as a brick wall or a cliff, either way, we're just putting our foot to the gas pedal heading towards it. And I find that, I think that responsibility weighs heavily on us. And I think we should really be taking a very hard look at how we look at this budget and how looking at this budget begins to set a tone or a pattern for subsequent years.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you. Anybody else? Big picture thoughts, reactions to what Penn said?
Actually, I had a question, Jeremy, in the very beginning, but I did want to interrupt you, and I took a screenshot of it. In regards to your position, and let me just pull up the screenshot. I don't need it for, I was just wondering, like, as far as HR, are you basically handle HR, and are you trying to crunch the numbers a little bit more and do you have people go back to the drawing board for numbers or anything like that too, as far as hours, and are you part of any of that discussion? Because I'm really nervous about unfunded liabilities and combining jobs. That's where I see some issues and where we can cut back, because you have 11% and 11%, so that's 22% of the budget. Between insurance, unfunded, pension, future pension, and whatnot. I'm just curious about your thoughts and position on that.
Sure. Actually not as easy and clear cut an answer as it probably should be, but the town bylaw does have some duties and authority given to the town administrator for some HR functions, and also requests or requires the town manager to hire an HR professional. What gets a little bit more unclear is the direct authority that the town administrator has over various boards and committees that don't report up through the select board's office that may be elected. That there may not be as direct a line towards that HR function as you might think.
And in regards to the budget makers, so to speak?
Same way. Again, this compilation of budgets was done based on, a request, basically a policy or, a request, if you will. And I just done not by what is dictated by the town bylaw as a requirement of the town administrator. It's not, the town administrator is not required to, or doesn't have the authority to put forward a budget. I'm helping you compile it.
And then to pick up on Penn's point, then Nora, it really comes to us in areas where we have concerns to raise those concerns.
Exactly. So then we can have concerns all we want, but then I guess, then the voters vote for it. They make ultimately the decision.
Yeah, I mean, we as advisory make a recommendation, and that recommendation might be something different than what a budget maker has submitted. But then ultimately it's town meeting that has authority to set the budget.
right? I'd just like to clarify, that's all.
Yeah, good, thanks. But he
Yes, it's all a learning process for me, but I think hearing Jeremy's presentation, which was very detailed and helpful, Jeremy. I guess the things like we as an advisory committee probably gave the wrong guidance to the to the town or departments, because it doesn't seem like the numbers could ever work with, a 2.5% levy limit, salaries going up 3.5%, retirement, healthcare always growing faster. Flat budgets just doesn't work in this environment. And I don't know how the math ever works, frankly, on a flat budget with these type of numbers. So going forward, budgets always have to be down for everyone else if everything else is going to run hotter than 2.5%, 3%, right? Am I understanding the math right? Budgets can never be flat for these departments. And now that we don't have excess capacity anymore.
Jeremy, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of build on what Mike was saying. Could I share my screen again?
Sure.
There's other context as well that might be helpful. Let me get back to it. So Dan, this is something that you had put together to help with some context. Of course, we're in a time of pretty high inflation, and obviously that not only affects you folks, but it affects the town government as well. So Dan put this together basically back to 2012 has what the actual operating budget was that it was approved at town meeting is the black, and then basically normalizing it to what the price index has been since that time. And you can see, and I think the story here was that the town's budget actually tracked fairly closely to what the cost of inflation was. So, I mean, that is a helpful piece of context to show that, I think your budget process hasn't been all that inefficient in that you have been tracking inflation. And I'm not sure what you do about that. So Prop 2.5 does not account for inflation. It's 2.5% regardless of the year. And the vast majority of your revenues to offset your budget are property taxes, 90%. If the town exploit other revenue sources, it might help on your property taxes.
Yeah, so long as inflation is above 2.5%, and there's not a lot of new growth, then we can't have, something has to give, obviously.
Right. But so, back before inflation picked up, there was a stretch of years where, as Jeremy showed, the excess levy capacity was quite substantial because inflation was low, COLAs were low, expenses weren't rising that rapidly. And so that 2.5% wasn't Prop 2.5% increment wasn't really a factor because we were well below the limit of what the town could tax. As Jeremy said, Prop 2.5 not indexed for inflation. So with higher inflation and higher costs, then indeed we end up in this very uncomfortable place where either as you said, Mike, either we need to kind of shift the guidance that we're providing and have some things have some things coming down because you can't have things continuing to go up at more than 2.5% without significant new growth, which we don't really have. And so then we end up in this crunch. And I think Jeremy's presentation highlighted that while we can probably slip by this year, we're going to hit the crunch soon. Sorry, so let me just chime in with a few of my kind of overall reactions. I think we're in a really uncomfortable place. And I think we have some really difficult decisions to make about the budget, because I think, as Jeremy's presentation showed, the proposed budgets put us on a path where it's highly likely that, can't predict exactly what year, but we're on the path toward hitting the Prop 2.5 limits, which puts the town in the position either of having Prop 2.5 control how much the budget can increase, or the select board needing to ask the voters for an override. And I think neither of those are very attractive options. So I'm, quite uncomfortable with where we are. I think Mike raises an interesting question of whether, given now that we've seen the roll up and what everything looks like, whether the guidance that we as advisory provided was the right guidance, because, maybe it didn't put us in a place that we're all comfortable with. I think one really difficult piece of this is the schools piece, where Pine Hill looking for an 8% increase, the region looking for a 6% increase. As Jeremy showed, that adds up to about a 1.3 million increase in expenses. And the school budgets are challenging to manage, and that the governance process is complex. Not so much for Pine Hill School, although there's a school committee that ultimately works on that budget that they then present to us, but particularly on the budget for the middle school and high school, where they're looking for a 6% increase. That's really challenging governance structure, because it's shared with Dover. Dover doesn't always share our perspective on school budget matters. And then there's the school committee that's in the midst of all of that as well. We're going to try to make some progress on Friday when Paul, Mike, W, and I meet with the business manager of the schools. But that's just a really complex process. And as Jeremy's chart showed, about 3/5 of the budget is the schools. So I'm feeling like we're in this very uncomfortable position. I have a lot of sympathy for Penn's comments and Mike's comments. And I think as a committee, we have some decisions to make about what kind of feedback we want to provide back to budget makers. I think the challenge is taken individually, many of the particular items that are being asked for, at least in my mind, pretty good rationale for them. Either it's a state mandate, or there's a need that would be well served. But collectively, they all add up to something that does seem like it's putting us on a path that would take us to a bad place. And so whatever fiscal stringency we don't do this year, we're just going to have to do at some point in the future, it seems like. Okay, Sean, you had your hand up before if you wanted to jump in.
I wouldn't mind. I just wanted to make a comment as a somewhat outsider, and someone who's been on both sides of the budget. And I was on the select board those years where we had a massive windfall on the Prop 2.5 limit, and we didn't come close to it. And I think people might remember me jumping up and down saying, you probably should spend some of this money. And I want to caution, there's nothing we can do about it at this point, but some of this we did to ourselves, because when we had the limit, we didn't spend it. And we pushed ourselves right up to the limit, and now we're scared of it. There's times we probably should have spent. The guidance has never changed. I don't remember a single time the guidance was take this year and spend some money that you haven't been able to spend the past few years. The guidance every year is level fund, level fund, level fund, level fund. So it's very predictable, but the chart isn't consistent, right? We weren't anywhere close to the limit in 2017, 18, 19, but it was the same exact process. So I think we need to take that caution in the years when we have a little better financial aspect. We probably should be thinking long term about where we should be spending it.
Yeah, I think I just build on that I think a key factor for why that excess levy limit went away from the really high numbers in 2017, particularly the really sharp drop off in the last 2 years, I think is coming about because Prop 2.5 is not indexed for inflation. It's just 2.5%. So with inflation, a year ago running at 8+%, and expenses, right, in your realm, Sean, and all across the town, expenses rising, fuel prices last year, shooting way up. Those, to maintain current services, those costs are going to go up a lot more than 2.5%. And then we eat up that excess levy capacity.
Right, but there's investments we could have made then that we're making now. We perhaps could have not kicked the can down the road every year because it's always the same. Don't spend it this year. There's things that several members of the advisory wanted to put in operating budgets that we never did. So we
Right.
financed. And we're going to finance them for 15, 20 years when we should have paid for them when we had the limit.
Yeah, it'd be important that if that was done, that it's a one-time thing, because if it's permanently built into the budget then we're going to grow on top of that in subsequent years, then we still have a challenge. But yeah, if it was a one-time thing, could have paid cash rather than borrowing. Yeah. Penn?
Can I jump back in? Just a quick thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just that, in terms of the guidance and the levy limit, those levy limit, it talks about how much we can raise taxes. It's not actually a budget cap, nor is it budget freedom. We have, just because we were in years that we were very far from the levy limit, that doesn't mean we had extra money floating around we could have spent. It simply meant we could have raised taxes more without hitting that limit. Because I think, one thing to keep in mind is it's one thing to look at the budgets, but I think it's worth coming back and looking again at the taxes that people are paying and the consequences of our budgets. As I said, if the proposed budget went through, that would raise the average household tax, 5.6%, which is just one number, but another number is, basically $1,200. And so we could have, the levy limit prevents us from raising taxes beyond a certain level. Lower limit makes things more comfortable, but it's also the fact that, a lot of this is a signal that taxes we are hitting a crunch. We could have maybe done things differently in the past, but whether we did or didn't, we're in a crunch. We're hitting crunch time now, I think.
Anybody else anybody who has an advisor who hasn't offered a reaction I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but want to weigh in? You just unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question, because I noticed, I wasn't in the last meeting, and I noticed that since we're talking about the school budgets being a large portion of the overall budget, and that it was noted that the budget is comprised largely of the salary and benefits, that was what was noted for the increase for both the regional and the Pine Hill. Maybe this is something that's for a later discussion, but I'm just curious because I'm noticing that, like with some of the other budgets, like I'm thinking about library, like people like reducing part-time positions to a full-time position, and now we have that additional potential burden with pensions and benefits. Were there a lot of additional positions being proposed by either of the budgets for the school, like Pine Hill, or for the regional, or is that just to maintain existing staff? Like, I'm just wondering, is there any opportunity within there to decrease that in a way that?
Yeah. So the biggest part of it is new school contract and just contractual arrangements with teachers and salaries going up. There are some modest new additions to positions that they're requesting.
Okay.
I don't have the details in front of me.
That's
but
okay.
That's one of the things that we're going to talk about in that meeting on Friday.
Okay.
So there are some new things that they're asking for that I think, we're going to talk about with them, with, just how essential are they, but it doesn't add up to a huge amount. I think Paul did a calculation that for the Pine Hill budget, the new things they're asking for added up to, I think, 167,000. So, of that 1.3 million, a little bit of it, maybe a little more than 10% of it reflects some new things that they're asking for. Not all salary things, but new positions plus some other things they want to do. But it's not the bulk of it. The bulk of it is just the new contract with teachers.
And has it been the case historically that we give we give everybody advice for flat budgets and the schools is always not flat? Is that typical?
It's certainly been that way in the last couple of years. I don't have the longer history in mind.
Okay.
To be fair to the schools, some of it is state mandates relating.
Oh, I
to,
understand. I'm just asking. I'm
a whole
only
host of
asking because
things.
I'm
Yeah.
new to the committee and I don't understand. And I know they take up a lot of the budget, and obviously it's important.
I mean,
but it's
last
hard to
year
understand.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to understand because I know we asked that of all of the other budget makers, and I just was curious because it does comprise a large portion of the budget. If it's typical, and I mean those are things that are outside of their control, maybe that are the other budget makers don't have to. They're not as impacted by it. I was just curious. It's more just a question of curiosity.
I mean, last year the budget increases were pretty similar. They were very large last year as well, and I think that's been true for some time.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I just had one quick question under the comparison is the thief of joy. But Jeremy, how does this relate? How does our budget relate to others? I mean, I was just looking up Lincoln and they have 2,500 households. We have 1,500, more or less. I just went on Google, whatnot, and they almost seem to have a similar budget, maybe a little bit higher. I mean, is this in line with what you see for other similar towns, although nobody is really quite as similar? Any thoughts on that, or your thoughts?
Sure. I think your nearest peer is probably Dover. I know Dan's done some comparisons that might be helpful, but we're smaller than Lincoln, we're smaller than Dover. There's fixed costs that are shared, that the more you can spread those fixed costs out, the lower your tax burden would be. So certainly, the number of households and the expectations for service factor into what your taxes are.
It's an interesting question though, Nora, and there's some analysis that could be interesting to do to either per household or per resident, where do we compare to some sort of similar towns? That's an interesting question. Anybody else on big picture before we turn to individual budgets? Eric, did you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, against my better judgment. I just want to add kind of a side note, and this is kind of a big picture observation. I grew up in town. My family's been in town forever. In the 90s, Sherborn had higher real estate values than Dover, and Dover now has higher real estate values significantly than Sherborn. I can't help but wonder, is some of that associated with our simply tax rate? Dover has like 2/3 of the per $1,000, and someone can verify that, tax rate than we do. And if we keep on increasing, go through overrides or whatever else, push the limit to the levy there, will we continue to kind of snowball and basically worsen our property values? And that's just something I think we have to look at in the big picture. I've shared my thoughts with you, Dan. I've shared my thoughts with Jeremy. I didn't come here prepared with my thoughts, so I'd like to actually gather some. But I think we have to really be leery on pushing the levy limit and especially overrides every single year, because we're still the highest of all surrounding communities right now. And I want to say we're still top 5 in the state. And again, someone can verify that. So, and our property values will never increase as long as we continue to have. And someone buys a $1 million home in Sherborn, $1 million home in Dover, whatever else, they're still paying significantly lower taxes in our surrounding communities. So just something to think about.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Can I
Sounds
say
like,
something?
just hang on one second, Nora. And Erica, appreciate those comments, and sounds like hopefully you've had a chance to share those comments with your colleagues on the select board as well. Okay, Nora, go ahead.
Eric, I totally understand what you're saying and appreciate that. And the issue though is that our tax rate, it all has to do really was what we're spending. So, I mean, maybe Wendy can come in here, but if we had lower spending, then the tax rate would come down. I hear you on it because I always, being in real estate, doing the tap dance, why is it, but at one point it was 12 versus, 19, or now it's 11 versus, what is it, 11 versus, Wendy, if you don't mind chiming in, versus 1698, I think it is per thousand now. So we've gotten down.
So yeah, so when I started in 2014, 15, the tax rate was like $20.52. And I'd like to take credit for it, but it's the market, right, that drives it. Values go up, the tax rate goes down. But your taxes don't go down, right? So there's been a lot of phone calls this year with people, receiving their tax bills. I look and compare the property values in Dover compared to Sherborn, and sometimes, and Nora, you can tell me, but sometimes it's almost like double the value, or double the market, or at least 3/4 higher than what you would, pay
Dover's
in
is Dover's is
Dover.
96 right now per thousand.
Yeah, yeah. How much is it? I'm sorry.
$10.96 per thousand.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're at,
And
is it 1695?
1695. Yes. Yep.
So of course,
Yep.
comparing tax bills across Dover and Sherborn, they don't differ as much as you'd think from the tax rates, because picking up on something Wendy's,
Right.
the same house in Dover, the same house in Sherborn, again, has a higher valuation in Dover. So it's that lower
Correct.
tax rate against the higher valuation. So average tax bills are higher in Sherborn than Dover, but not by as much as you might think, given just the difference in the tax rates.
Yeah, I actually sent Jeremy this week a spreadsheet of different tax bills in kind of similar. So median assessed value and tax bills. And in Sherborn, the average tax bill is $18,695. And Dover, it is $15,182. Concord, 17,000, a little over 17,000. Wellesley's 16. Lincoln is 18,433. Carlisle's 15,000. So it's just interesting to kind of see it all put together.
But
Eric, go ahead.
But ultimately, when someone comes in, they're looking to buy in, they have a certain amount of money to spend, and it's a matter of the mortgage plus the taxes, and it's not counting under the values. The values, Sherborn, relative to the surrounding communities, has been decreasing, and Dover decreasing, and Dover's has been increasing. That's what. Yes, you can look at average tax for what you pay and so on like that, but ultimately there is a property value. People come in, they move. The property values are very important, and it's very relative to this. And if we keep the property values, if we keep the tax rate lower, the values go higher, and it becomes a snowball effect. And we've been kind of going the opposite direction the last 30 years. And that's just my own observation. I've been looking every single year
I agree.
since I think 1985 or 86. I can't tell you the numbers off the top of my head. And it has been decreasing, and it's I believe it's largely due to actually the tax rate itself. But anyways, it just, again, big picture thoughts. That's all.
Yeah, thanks. Jeremy, did you want to get in on this?
Yeah, it was actually a little bit different from this context, so I could go after Penn if.
All right, Penn, go ahead, and then Jeremy will come to you, and then we should probably pivot to looking at some of these individual department budgets.
Well, just a quick thing. When my wife and I moved to Sherborn in 19 90, and we were looking at surrounding towns, including Dover, and we kind of made the calculation that apples to apples, house to house, not cost to cost, but house to house, houses in Dover would cost more than Sherborn. But I'm trying, basically, we did the math, said, all right, for probably between 5 to 10 years, after that period of time, we would have spent in taxes in Sherborn the difference between what we paid to buy our house and what we would have paid in Dover for an equivalent house with a lower tax rate. So we, made that calculation. We said, well, we like Sherborn. We'll see we don't know where we'll be in 10 years. We'll kind of roll the dice. But, that was, to Eric's point, that was absolutely part of our calculation. And I could easily have seen us or someone else making a different calculation. I'm going to be here for 15 years. I'm definitely going to do better buying in Sherborn. I'm sorry, buying in a town with lower taxes, not the tax rate. We were actually looking at tax costs. So yeah, I think people make that calculation, and I don't think we're going in the right, as Eric said, we're not heading in the right direction on that front.
All right, so before we leave this, just again, don't want to put anyone on the spot, but for those on advisory who haven't offered a perspective, feel free to do so if you like. We'll have other chances to come back to this as well.
Well, I
Okay.
think we articulated the problem, but what are we going to do about it? Right?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly the right question to ask. And as I said, I think the challenge is if you look at individual budgets, there are places where I have concerns about particular items. Same thing that you and others have mentioned, Natalie, about increasing hours of positions or converting positions to benefit it and so on. And those may all be, good things to focus on, but that's not going to add up to enough that's really going to dramatically change things. To dramatically change things, we really would need to think about, our overall guidance and what we said and, what our expectation is for different departments. And could go in a direction that would take this in a different direction, but that would mean probably not a current services budget, but a budget that didn't match current services with on a current services budget this year and in future years we hit Prop 2.5 limit, so we'd need to do something different than that, and that's a decision that we can make.
But it's too late to make it this time. So next year you'd have to do this budget before the guidance letter, right? And so frame the guidance letter differently.
Yes.
Okay.
Or do a better job, of projecting where things are going to go. So I was very surprised by the school budgets this year. Hadn't expected that, but given that happened, I think it did put us in this situation where, wow, these are really big numbers and put us in this uncomfortable position. Jeremy. Oh, Wasim, let's go to you if you wanted before we come to Jeremy. Wasim, go ahead.
So I tried to say this in our first advisory or second advisory meeting, but I definitely fumbled it. But Eric said it very beautifully, the snowballing effect related to tax rates. So I completely agree with this. The more prospective buyers can spend towards a mortgage versus towards the tax bill, the higher value the houses are going to be here. And I just want to say that the focus on that is a long-term focus. Right now, we're just in a unique position where the interest rates are going up, and that causes the property values to, or maybe I'm sorry, the additional building that we're having in town is slowing down. So we're hitting this curve where the the budget is increasing at a higher rate than the inflation. That will turn around. So, but how do we, to answer the question of how do we address this? One idea I have is something we've started doing already. So, for example, in the police budget, there's the regionalization, and I think more of that needs to happen. So, meaning more, in industry, more mergers, right? That happens in industry. I wonder if that can happen in town services, right? So again, the regionalization of the police dispatch was a great example of it. I think more and more we should look at more and more opportunities like that. I think the treasurer collector, right? That just happened. So that's another good example. So I guess the points I'm trying to make, yes, completely agree with what you said, Eric. We're spending a lot of time on this right now just because we are just hitting the right curve but this is always, the problem has always been there, right? And the focus on the budget is a full-time job forever. And I wonder if one way to solve these issues is to think about mergers, regionalization.
We've always danced right on the edge, and then when something unexpected happens, it just doesn't bode well.
Yeah.
Or increased revenue.
Yep.
Yeah. Jeremy, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Nora. A budget has two sides, not only your expenses, and it's great that you focus on the expenses. You definitely need to do that, but there's really, I think there's an opportunity for Sherborn to look at its revenues. There's you can explore regionalization, certainly, to reduce expenses. Yes, reduce your expenses, you reduce your tax burden, but you're going to reach a point where your expectation, your for services, you hit that. You can't go any lower, and it just has a certain cost. And so, where is the opportunity for new revenues? Well, per Prop 2.5, it's called new growth. And I think you need, compare new growth. What's our peer, Dover, look over the last 20 years, like Sean mentioned in the chat, what the difference in new growth was between Dover and Sherborn. I think it's going to be illuminating if you do that. That has grown their revenue stream more than Sherborn. They're able to share more costs over more households. In reality, there's a cost to stay the same. But anyway, I'm just urging you not only to look at expenses, but think about how we can all work together on the revenue side too.
I was looking for a spreadsheet here, which I'm not going to be able to put my fingers on fast enough. I have a spreadsheet that does the comparison of new growth in Sherborn to kind of 10 or so comparable communities, and Sherborn has lagged behind. And so I think that raises, this is an issue for this year's budget. That's not gonna solve the issue that we're talking about for the FY25 budget. But more broadly, it does suggest that other communities have made different decisions about how willing the community is to allow growth relative to Sherborn, and it's a little bit like low growth, great schools, low taxes. It's sort of like pick 2 out of 3. You can't have great schools, low taxes, and no growth in town. That just the pieces just don't add up. So I guess I would align myself with Jeremy's comments about not for this year, but longer term, about the importance of thinking about opportunities for new growth. Eric, if you want to jump in and then go to Wendy.
Just a quick thing. I'm trying to look it up, but I can't find it immediately. 1972 Sherborn Master Plan. The town had 4,200 residents. We now have 4,400 residents. So the growth has not been huge. And also compared us to all surrounding communities, which all exceeded us in growth, at least in population, presumably results in actually real estate as well. So yeah, you are correct about that. There's no question. And now for a number of different reasons, which I'll talk about offline, the primary growth in recent years looks like it's largely been 40Bs, which likely will not give significant revenue relative to the actual demands on whatever it is, services as well. So I'm not trying to make a doomsday thing there, but I think it's just an example of you know, just trying to demonstrate what's been happening over the last 50 years. That's all.
Yeah, thanks. Wendy.
Yes, so I just wanted to quickly touch upon the new growth and what's really carried us over, the past 8 years, 9 years has been the Peace Abbey development, the 59 North Main single family condos, and Southfield. And so that has given us significant growth, which has given us a much higher, excess levy capacity. And in comparison with, let's just say, zoning and bylaws in other communities and say Dover, it's not as restrictive. And therefore, rather than allowing people to put on additions or improve their home, we're not going to see the same values because the size of the homes and additions on the homes are restricted in Sherborn versus Dover.
Yeah.
So if we could allow some smart growth, that's going to really carry us through.
If anyone wants to contact me, I could talk about that for 3 hours, but what Wendy just said.
I'll call you tomorrow, Eric.
Okay.
All right. All right. So that, I think, provides us with some interesting food for thought. And I think I want to reflect a little bit on everything that everybody said, and then think about possible strategies for going forward. These issues are going to become particularly important at our subsequent meetings when when we'll be focusing on the departments with the larger budgets, which, where there is more scope for more significant savings. The departments we're talking about tonight, with really just the one exception of town buildings, are all relatively small departments. So let me suggest that we shift and focus on individual departments wherever there might be questions. Again, some of these, as Jeremy highlighted, budgets are small within guidance, perhaps not any questions. There are probably others where I know there's somewhere I have questions and others probably do too. And then I think we need to do a bit of just big picture thinking as to, how do we want to manage things at our next couple meetings when we start approaching departments with larger budgets. If that sounds like a reasonable path forward, why don't we turn to particular budgets? So I was going to suggest we go through these in the order on the agenda. So I will call out each budget. I can screen share the budgets for anything anybody wants to see. And if there are any questions on a particular budget, I'll do a screen share. If there aren't any questions on a particular budget, then don't need to do the screen share and we can just move on. Does that sound like a reasonable path forward to everybody? Everybody's okay. Okay, good. So let's do that. So let's start with assessor. So Wendy, and I actually have a question for Wendy on that one. So I'm gonna pop that budget up and do a screen share. And this is really not so much a question or concern, but more just explanation. Jeremy had mentioned that this is the year for updating the parcel database and maps, and that leads to a bump in that category of the budget, and thought maybe Wendy, you could just tell us a little bit about why that's happening and what's going on with that.
Sure. So this dollar amount, the 3384, will be something that will be in the budget every year. In 2015, the town voted a capital article for about $10,000 for mapping changes. This is a state mandate. If we do not have our maps updated, we lose out on grants, funding, certification of the tax rate and such. So this is a state mandate. I was able to participate in a grant program. And so over the past 9 years, I still have $1,500 left of the 10,000 that was the capital article that was voted at town meeting, because I entered us into a grant program through the state. So I was able to get some of this done, a lot of it done for free. So now there's only $1,500 left. It sunsets in 2025. And so I'm going to need map maintenance every year. It's best practice to do it every year. It used to be that you only had to do it every 3 to 5. But having this done live time as the changes are happening, as the plans are approved and there's a shovel in the ground, it is very useful for several departments: planning, Board of Health, obviously assessing, DPW, building department, police and fire. So I'm taking the approach of doing this yearly as it's best practice.
Thanks,
And
Wendy.
so we just, yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or?
Okay. All right. Thanks, Wendy. So moving on
Thank
to
you.
collector treasurer. There's enough stuff going on there. I was thinking either Jeremy or Pam, it would be interesting if you could just kind of walk us through. Give me 1 second. Walk us through, get to the right spot here. I'm not sure which screen would be which tab would be most helpful to look at, but just help everybody understand how the two pieces, the two departments came together and the financial implications. What's the best tab to look at for that?
Well, I like the combo Pam one.
Okay, there it is.
Just because I think it's a little easier to compare the numbers.
Great.
So I just did a quick analysis I did the treasurer budget first, then I did the collector budget. The treasurer budget had come in under, other than salaries, so did the collector budget. And then I just combined the two of them as they are. And then I did the proposed combination. So you can see there's a large savings in there from the salary, because we go from having 2 benefit employees just to having 1. So that's a savings of like 38,500. And then the combination of them, we saved a little bit of money in with like training and going to meetings, because we're down 1 person that doesn't have to go to those meetings anymore. The only really increase in the budget was for postage, and that was in the treasurer budget with the warrants. paying for more postage, because I guess we're mailing more bills. And that was really it. Just consolidating them brought us down to a savings of $43,000. So that's pretty good.
Thanks, Pam.
In addition to that, Dan, there's expenses for that benefited position that's not going to be needed going forward that are in other budgets that
Right.
also contribute to the savings. So, if those benefits sum out to a benefited position, $14,000 per year on average, then that's an additional savings as a result of this
Mhm.
nomination.
Right. Thanks, Pam. Wasim, did you have a question or comment on this?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
So quick question, is the tax elected official the top line? So essentially this is, instead of having a treasurer and collector, we now have one position, and the new salary line for that, the 110, is instead of the 275,000?
Yes. Yep, it would have been 151,244.
Right, but this is essentially one person now. Okay, and is it, okay. I'm just curious, is this the, is it one of the two people that was the treasurer and collector and now
Yeah,
is?
it's me.
Okay. So, okay,
And my hours increased, so I'm full-time now. I'm 40 hours.
okay, thank you. You predicted one of the questions I was gonna have.
Yeah.
The two previous roles were maybe not 40 hours.
Correct.
And now they're 40 hours. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. May I ask how many hours that the two previous positions were in the past?
30.
Oh, 30, 40. Okay.
Yeah.
Sense.
Yep.
Pam, should I switch to the Form 5 tab? Would that be helpful?
Sure.
So I don't know if that does. I'm not sure that has maybe that doesn't have all the info that is needed.
No, that's good. That's very good. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on this? Okay. So the next one would be town clerk and elections. If anybody wanted to, I didn't have anything on that. If anybody wanted to dig in on that. Again, there were some increases, but it's pretty well documented with what was behind them with presidential election and other things. Jackie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the increase for elections and registration also covers the September primary, which is, so we have 2 additional elections for fiscal 25. It's not just one.
Right, 'cause it's a September primary and the presidential. Right,
Correct.
yeah, thanks. Accountant. Anybody with anything there? So I guess I had a question just about I was trying to track through the numbers and Deb, so the position for the assistant town accountant, what's the status of that position?
We don't have an assistant town accountant. I have
Okay.
2 admin assistants
Okay,
that take up the hours of the assistant town accountant.
okay. So I saw in your Form 5, there was a line for assistant town accountant.
Yeah, that's what I was
Showing-
previously, yes.
Okay, okay. So it's not like that's an unfilled position. That's gone, it's been organized in a different way.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, good. That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm that. Thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else? I can pop that budget up if anybody wanted to see the numbers.
I'd suggest just popping them up and people can take a,
Okay. Sure. Did you want me to go back to town clerk elections, Nora? Okay, so let me just get the accountant one up. So there it is, if anybody wanted to inquire about anything there or dig in. Okay, so then moving on. The next one would be advisories committee's budget. Which just to pop it up. So the elements, just getting deep into the weeds. But the elements in the budget are we typically pay someone to take minutes at the public hearing because we're all participating, so it'd be hard for any of us to do that. So that's this top item, and it's basically going up in line more or less with the recommended COLA. And the other pieces add up to exactly the same as last year, the 3977 this year. There's a bit of rearranging because last year's budget, there was a line for printing and postage. And there was also a postage line, so the postage was split across two lines, and now it's just been reallocated. So the printing is just an estimate of the printing, and the postage is just an estimate of the postage, but adds up to the same amount. So nothing there, but just full transparency, so nobody thinks that advisory is trying to do something funny with its own budget. Okay, enough of that. All right, historical commission. Let me get that one popped up. Okay. Comments, questions? Pen, go ahead.
Let me dive in because I'm the liaison and they reached out to me and I had a meeting with them, which I talked about last time. And essentially this has an item on it that they hadn't presented to me, which is a new sign. But also they talk about adding a fifth sign to the 4 signs they had in the past. And then this also talks about, and this part is new to me, a Sherborn Historic Homes, how many remain sign. They had not spoken to me about that sign, which is 1,400 on here. With the sign they had talked about, I had asked them to go back and look for alternate vendors because they had gotten an estimate for one sign from the same person who provided the other 4, and that estimate was more than, if I remember correctly, than the cost of two of the previous signs, and it was for a lesser quality sign. So something, their vendor didn't seem to be very happy. I'm not quite sure what was going on, but I would suggest that we let them know that they need to continue to explore alternatives because they're looking to spend more money than they talked about with the $1,400 sign, and more money than I think they need to spend on a new sign. I did a little bit of research, and the price they were quoted was very, very high relative to what I was able to price out on my own. So I think they just need to look at other options. I know it's not a lot of money, but I think that, we should be looking at every dollar and just sort of figuring out, does this need to be spent? Is this the most efficient way, and so on. So that's my thought on it.
Thanks, Penn. Jeremy, question for you. So in terms of conveying that message to folks there, is that something you would like to do, or you'd prefer that advisory handle that?
Either way is fine with me, whatever you're comfortable with.
Penn, do you want to be the one to convey that message to them? Would you prefer Jeremy does that?
Happy to do it.
Okay.
If it's appropriate for the liaison to do it, I'm happy to do it. No problem.
So I think it is, but let's just do a quick. If anybody on advisory disagrees with what Penn said, this would be the good time to say that, just to make sure. I'm guessing there's a consensus on the committee to support what Penn said. And provided there's a consensus, then Penn, you're absolutely authorized to go convey that message back to them. Everybody's good with that? Okay. All right. Penn, that's good. You'll follow up with them? Okay.
Will do.
That is excellent. Okay.
Yeah. Dan, may I just make a comment?
Yes.
About, yes, it's a smaller amount, and we'll get a significantly bigger dividend if we shave just a tiny percentage of a much bigger
yes,
amount.
of course.
Right. So and for us, even at advisory, to spend proportionately longer time looking at the biggest budgets. So I've kind of always thought it's weird that we in advisory, we spend the same amount of time on smaller budgets as we do sometimes on bigger budgets, right? And the return on our time invested is not the same. And as a matter of fact, I've been on advisory and I've never seen a school budget, right? I mean, that's kind of discussed predominantly outside of advisory, right? So, so that's the only comment, the extent of what I will say about this.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, you're absolutely right that, getting the historical commission to get another bid and, get this cost down by $400 or $500, not a big deal compared to the school budget, or police, fire, DPW, and so on. And we're going to get to those, on February 7th. That meeting is just police, fire, debt service, which probably is just an update, and then DPW. So we'll have, I think, a good chunk of time to focus on those. And then the January 24th meeting is kind of a mix of some smaller budgets and some bigger budgets. I've got
and there you go. I guess the point I'm trying to make is we have one meeting to discuss, what is it, 15% of the budget or 20%?
Yeah.
Right? Of how many meetings, budget meetings. So that's kind of, I guess, related to my point.
Yeah, so, on that, we could, if there's interest, we could add another meeting. Last year, we met pretty much every week, thinking, perhaps incorrectly, that this year, with Jeremy kind of doing a roll-up at the beginning and kind of setting the stage, that, it might work to meet every other week and to streamline things a little bit. It could be that was not the right thought. And if, the sentiment, Wasim, is that, it'd be better to have more time to spend on, say the police, fire, DPW, we absolutely could add a meeting to spread those out and have some more time to do that. I think January 31st would be the obvious day to add a meeting and spread those out. And, there could be merit to that, particularly given the earlier conversation that we had. And I think the pressures that we're all feeling and that, regarding the current budget situation. So if there's sentiment that would be a good thing to do, absolutely can do that. And we do that on February 14th, have a full meeting just to talk about schools. But I take your point, Wasim, that the school thing is pretty opaque, and it's a weird governance structure. It's pretty opaque, I think, to Mike, Paul, and me as well. And we're going to the school committee meetings and engaging with them, but it remains it is, that process is pretty opaque. All right, so let's pick up a couple comments and then we can talk about let's pick up a couple comments now. Let's finish going through the list of budgets for today. Then let's talk about if we want to do a January 31 meeting. And I've got some bigger picture budget thoughts of how we might proceed on that as well. So Penn, let's go to you and then to Sean.
Okay, well, this is not more relevant toward the tail end, but I'll just throw it in now. I'd be fully in favor of more meetings for sure. And the other thing is, can we get budgets from the school? We get budgets from everybody else. Can we get those? Does it have to be opaque, or is there a way to pull back the veil?
So we have, I mean, Paul, Mike, and I, and Jeremy, and others in town have those budgets. They present them in a public meeting. The Sherborn School Committee, the Regional School Committee presents those budgets. And Jeremy, I think you have electronic copies of them.
No, I'm sorry, I don't have a hard copy.
Oh, but do you have just like a PDF or in a form that's emailable around?
Yeah, we could scan and make a PDF out of that. Yes.
So would it be feasible for you to do that? Send it to me and then I can send it around to everyone on advisory so everyone could see it?
Can do.
Okay, that would be great. And then everybody can, they're long and complicated documents. And I think you'll find, even with the document in hand, that the word, I want to be careful how I say this. It isn't going to tell you everything you'd want to know. But I think certainly you can get those around for anybody who wants to dig in and see that. And I've got some more comments on schools after we get through these budgets and we come back to talking big picture. Sean, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to point out, it's not just, you're right, it's your obligation to go through those budgets. If you're going to go line item by line item in multiple meetings with my budgets that equate to about 5% of the, you better go through those school budgets that are up 8.13% just on the Pine Hill. You need to do that. And you have every right. This entire board should know everything about that budget. And you have every right to push back on it. I don't care how many school committees show up. There's plenty of times that the advisory committee pushed back on the school and got this budget in line. But to make myself and the other public safety heads try to fund the gap that's created by the school is not to do. And that's just coming from a taxpayer. And they have 3 kids in that school system. And I'm not going to support a school budget that's over that much that you're going to ask the police, fire, and DPW to try to fund. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. I mean, that's an important point. And just to be clear, right, Paul, Mike, and I are meeting with Dawn, and we are intending to talk about those things. I think being realistic, the challenge is a big chunk of those increases are contractual agreements with the teachers, which can't be controlled at this point, and also state mandates, particularly around special education, that can't really be controlled. And so it is just, there are some pieces to push back on and say, town can't, don't want to do that, don't want to pay for that. And I think that's part of what we're going to talk about on Friday. But, realistic.
Then that's the equivalent saying I'm hiring 3 people and you can't do anything about my contractual obligations. $663,000 at Pine Hill is a contractual obligation. That can't be. I'm sorry.
So a significant chunk of that, right? A significant chunk of the Pine Hill budget are salaries, and salaries move according to contract. they are asking for some new things, and I think we're going to push back on that. I am just trying to set expectations in a realistic place that those budgets, I think, are going to come down, but they're not going to come down to a degree that's going to solve the problem that we've all been talking about tonight. They're just not, they, between state mandates and contractual obligations, they're going to come down, but not enough to solve the problem we're talking about tonight. Maybe since we're talking about schools, maybe this is a good point to jump in with my question about schools. So Sean expressed a sentiment that, we should push back really hard on the schools. I wonder to what degree that's a consensus of the committee. So let me just put that out there. Let's finish going through the budgets, and then at the end, let's come back to that, because I think that would be really helpful for Mike, Paul, and me when we meet with the schools folks on Friday. Sean, I appreciate the comment, because it's this just really messy situation of pressures on the budget, and the schools are a big part of that pressure on the budget. So I appreciate the comment. Okay, so continuing on. Okay, give me 1 second here. Okay, I think we're going to come to veterans next. I will pop that up. Okay. Questions, comments on this budget? Okay, then moving on. We'll come to the cemetery budget. Okay. Let's see, hang on a second, I'm not in the right tab here. I think this is the probably most helpful tab. Anything here people wanted to talk about?
Who does the tree work?
It's a vendor that's hired that does the tree work for the cemetery commission.
So we haven't had any tree work done in the last several years then, looks like.
I believe they may use their capital accounts for a fair amount of their tree work, not this operating budget. They have other budget lines in the capital.
Same thing with repairs and maintenance, I would take it too.
I got the impression here, Nora, and this is just an impression, that they had a lot of stuff in that lawn mowing line and that contract, that, the last year's budget, the 87,000 for lawn mowing.
Okay, they separated it
I
out,
think,
okay.
yeah, I think maybe splitting that out into pieces so that it's
Right.
more about a reformatting of the budget rather than they weren't spending any money. Deb, did you have a?
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
They just always put it in those 3 line items, and then this past year they gave us this Form 4 that had all this more detail. So we thought, you know what, we might as well go ahead and add some new budget line items so that we can take a closer look at it. So we didn't go back and resort the history. So that's why you see those clumped together. So you see 87,000 in lawn mowing, and next year it'll be a much lower number.
Thank you.
Anybody else on this one? Okay. And then recycling. Guessing nothing here anybody wants to talk about. Not much going on here. Okay. And transfer station. All right, Sean, did you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Yeah, the only major increase happened today. We were notified, I think it was in November, and I sent some of this to Deb. I don't know if she forwarded it, but DEP notified us that they want us to start doing PFAS testing of the groundwater and surface water around the transfer station. This is in line with what Jeremy saw in Natick years ago, and I honestly thought we were going to be mandated to do it a couple years ago. We weren't. So once we were notified, I asked our contractor, Stantec, that does the annual inspections, to gather up what that was going to cost, because obviously DEP's mandating it now to be in line with next fall. We do the inspection every fall, both of the cap, the condition of the cap, the operations within the transfer station, and then the environmental monitoring. So next fall we'll add that testing in. It was about 22,000 and change in additional costs for the PFAS testing. So that significantly raised that number. I had already put in a guess that I had. I think I was up at an extra 15,000, but it wasn't enough in the budget that I had originally submitted. So it was updated just in time for tonight. Again, that's not really, that's mandated. If it's not paid for here, it'll be paid for somewhere else.
Sean, why did hazardous waste disposal go down $4,000 from 10 to 6?
We had that one out on bid. That's the annual the hazardous waste weekend that we do, the pickup that we do
in the fall every year.
Right. And it's in the fall here, and it's a consortium of I think it's 11 towns that put it out to bid. And our residents can go to the other towns. So we all it goes out as one big bid, and it was a very favorable contract this past year. And I believe I think it's a 3-year contract. So that's based on the real cost.
Thank you.
Anything else on transfer station? Yeah, other than the items you mentioned, Sean, there's not a lot that's out of the ordinary here. Okay. So then on to town buildings. And I won't, on top of screen share, of course, is that those 2 background documents with an electricity and natural gas forecast. I won't try to share those as well, but here's the town building budget. Sean, do you want to talk about any pieces of this, or Jeremy, your view, or however?
So I can defer to the rate. In case anyone doesn't know, we got a very favorable contract on the supply side of electric and especially gas from last year. So these numbers reflect that, both the usage and the rates. Last year, what we didn't have was any historic numbers from the library. we now do. They're not where we wish they were, but at this point, they are what they are. So that's up quite a bit from what we had projected before. But some of the other numbers went in line once the rates went in our favor. Other than that, I can't read a single number on that screen. It's way too small.
Let me see
Any
if I
questions?
let me see if I can make this any bigger and if that helps anybody. Is that any better?
A little bit. That's better.
This is so minuscule and, but the charging station, do people pay for that charging station, or is that, so the $1,000, I'm just curious about the EV charging station. Can you just elaborate more? It's not really.
Right. What you don't see is the revenue side of that. And it's not favorable right now, but we're working on setting that up. When you first put them in, you don't make it. When you first put them in, they're free. But I think that comes through a grant, and then you set them up, and then you can fix the rate. Jeremy's working on that, but all we're going to see.
I've updated the rate.
Okay.
John, the rate is updated now to reflect the current cost, so we should be even.
Right.
What
goes
in goes out.
This budget sees the expense. The revenue's on a different side where Deb has it. But that's just the electricity feeding that system.
Just is the revenue piece at something like put a credit card in to charge your car, something like that? Yeah.
That's how it works. It's like an app on a phone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How much, just out of curiosity, I mean, if you don't know it off the top of your head, but what's the revenue on that? Like 2,000?
I don't recall, but we could get that for you, Nora.
Yeah, it's, you know.
I mean, I just did update the rates only about like 2-3 weeks ago. There had been a lag between what the actual electricity cost was and what was being charged. It was a pretty good deal. The town was subsidizing for a bit, but it is not now since I've gotten access to the system and updated the rates.
All right, thank you.
So I guess I had just again, these are small things, but just trying to track through all the numbers. So there's the series of numbers for repairs and maintenance kind of midway through that all actually last year and this year dropped to zero. So that must have been reallocated to some other line.
Yeah, we're slowly this. If it's not obvious, there's way too many lines in this budget.
Right.
There always was. So we're zeroing them out. We left them basically in there kind of to see the history.
Yep.
Of the totals, but I don't intend to populate most of those unless there's a reason to. The ones we zeroed out. There's no reason to keep track of like fire extinguishers per building.
Yeah. Of course.
There's certain things that are just it's kind of silly and cumbersome, and actually it's hard to track throughout the year, let alone in budget season while we're trying to do this.
So is there another line that we should be looking at that those were consolidated into?
In some cases, yes. In other cases, it's just to the overall, because you have I'm trying to sorry, I'm squinting, but you have town hall repairs and maintenance of equipment, but we have several different lines where that falls, right? Repairs and maintenance, there's HVAC, and there's septic, there's other things. So that was just kind of a generic for each building. So we kind of just knocked that block out.
Okay. And then down a few lines down, the HVAC maintenance and repairs for town hall look like it's jumping from 5,024, which seems in line with sort of recent prior years averages, jumping up to 10,000. So there's some piece going on there, a new contract or something.
Yeah, well, it's not. I mean, it's an aging system, and although we'll probably put some capital money into it, with an air handler, it's a big system. It's an aging system. It takes a lot of work to keep all those units working, and it's pretty expensive. You know, the first 15 to 20 years being in a building, you're not replacing much. But town halls, you know, approaching 24, 25 years since we remodeled it. So those costs are going up significantly. We were also, remember, we were pushing a lot of these expenses to the town buildings article each year, which was not proper. We should not have been doing that. Bond council was not happy with us doing that. And it doesn't fit within our, you know, our capital budget strategy. So we're slowly trying to get this in line with where it should be.
And so between those two factors, the aging system and maybe some of this previously was paid for in this other way, this is the kind of what we should think of going forward is likely more or less what the number is going to be, you know, this year and coming years.
Yeah, most of these increases, like especially like the one you have highlighted, I'm certain that was based on me looking at you know what Deb would have sent out a month ago or 2 months ago on you know the current.
Yep.
Right. So I was in November or December doing this budget and I was looking at it going, all right, well, we already spent $10,000 this year. It doesn't reflect on this sheet you're looking at. But you know, it's my best estimate knowing what I know previous 3 years and what we're in the middle of right now.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Paul, go ahead.
I had a question on line 22, which is, I think, building maintenance for the library. Curious why that's a new expense of $10,000 for a new building.
Because we didn't do any maintenance on the library prior to now. We didn't own it.
Right. But if it's a new building, right? Like I would think that when we finish a new building, you don't have to do maintenance the next year.
Geez, I wish. But that's not the case. That building's not, we've basically worn out the warranties on that building before we got in it.
Okay.
So that's grossly understated that we'll spend 10,000. We'll spend this year using up significantly more than that on punch list items and other items.
Okay, thanks.
What else? So Sean, would you regard this as essentially a current services budget? So to do in FY25 the same things we did in FY24, this is how much it will cost to do that?
Yeah.
Is there any? Oh, go ahead. Anything here that's, you know, thinking about our earlier conversations, anything here that's new in addition that, you know, maybe all of us aren't savvy enough to pick out of the numbers?
No, I mean, there's other wild cards that are playing in and the biggest one is like the water testing and everything else that we're having to do with, you know, with the well. But a lot of that's going to start rolling into capital if we start doing any work because of the PFAS in the well.
Which line is where is that on here?
I can't read anything on it.
Keep trying to make this bigger.
Is it line, I might be line 50? No, sorry.
TB town hall water testing.
All right.
Okay.
And then it looks flat now. It obviously climbed. It actually climbed prior to this sheet because we ramped up quite a bit during the library due to some other issues we had with the well. Those have now subsided, but PFAS has taken over and we're spending a lot of money on water testing.
And so if the things were to shift to not a current services but actual flat funding, the only way to do that would be to just stop doing stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, well, we can't really do that.
Well, I mean, some of it's mandates, right? So.
Well, that you can't shut the power off.
Yeah, no, I understand the difference. I'm just trying to make sure that,
Right.
I'm just trying to kind of emphasize the point that,
Right.
if one went to a flat funding, a bunch of stuff that we're doing, we just stop, like, as you said,
Right.
turn the power off one day a week, or I don't know, whatever, right? But we wouldn't be doing stuff that we're currently doing.
Yeah.
Okay. What
One
else?
question on that PFAS testing. Is that
And I-
PFAS testing something we have to do every year, or is that not
Oh,
need to be
geez,
done
what-
every year?
Town hall, we're doing it every month right now.
Okay, okay, so that's gonna be an ongoing expense in our future budgets as well.
And
Well, it's leading up to a significant capital expenditure to help rectify that, but we're a ways off from that. We'll be asking for money to start doing the engineering and consulting work for that.
Would,
But yeah, that problem's not going away.
and just to pick up on what you were just saying, and likely to get bigger in that the testing, if I understood correctly, the testing is gonna transform into, we actually need to do some remediation, which could be a significant expense.
Yeah, both. Yeah, it'll be a significant capital expense and then ongoing operational expenses. It'll never go away. Some of the testing now, we're just kind of proving what we already know. There's PFAS in the water, and we just keep testing it. We'll move beyond that to operational expenses of treating it so that water can be drinkable again. We're not using any of the water in the town campus for drinking. We're supplying everyone with bottled water, which is, not that difficult to do when it's your own 4 buildings. It's not like we have remote customers like a town or municipality where you're supplying it to people's houses.
John, I'm just trying to understand how the library electricity, now I'm on the library, I'm a liaison to them, so I'm trying to understand how that is so high. The electricity cost for that brand new building, which I thought was really state of the art, and I guess there's no solar over there. I mean, how is it so high? Are we anticipating that's going to stay like that?
Yes, it's a big building.
Okay,
And it's now that building more than any other buildings we have is also heated. It's not just cooled, but it's heated partially by electric. So
okay,
all the other buildings roll to natural gas heat.
okay,
The addition is mostly heated by electric. So you don't see a sharp drop off in the winter on the electric bills where, in the winter months, especially like town hall, as the electric drops off, the gas picks up. Obviously
yeah,
there's some pickup at the library because there is a boiler and it's heating, the main part of the building. But the air handlers just flip to the heat side instead of the cool side. And
okay,
I think we had hoped it would be more efficient. And we're working on some of that, but we're never going to cut the usage in half.
right,
In fact, me and Liz spent probably an hour and a half yesterday on the phone with somebody helping us try to work on some of the lighting issues. But that's, again, with LED lighting, we're not going to move the needle much by cycling the lights. Most of the heat goes into the most of the electricity, goes into the air handlers.
got it, okay, okay, yeah.
So Sean, it sounds like then, given what you just said, particularly about the lighting and heating and so on, that if library hours were scaled back in some fashion, wouldn't do much to the electricity or the heating bill.
No,
Yeah,
it
might affect other costs, but not these costs.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really not gonna. We actually backed off a roll on the heat and AC back significantly in at night, because it's a building full of books. So it has a huge heat load to try to heat up and cool down and heat up and cool down at night like you do at your house.
Yep.
It wasn't working all that efficient when it did it. And again, yeah, you can shut the lights off and save a few bucks, but turning them off at 8 versus 10 o'clock at night doesn't do a whole lot.
John,
Okay.
is this oil or gas?
It's natural gas.
Okay.
What else? Okay. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
That was very helpful. Give me a second here to just get my screen rearranged. Okay, so that's a quick tour through through these budgets. Coming back to big picture questions. I'm trying to think about, what collectively what kind of feedback we want to collectively provide back to Jeremy and budget makers. One approach is just to kind of continue. We can certainly add a meeting if there's interest in doing that. Continue with, kind of going through the budgets and seeing where we can identify potential savings reductions and push back on those. We could do something more dramatic and essentially say, our guidance was level funding with exceptions for particular areas where there were acute pressures. I think it's been interpreted as a level services budget. I think we heard that from Sean, that essentially level services budget and the scope for reducing those numbers would require not doing stuff that we're doing now. So I guess I'm interested in kind of the sense of the committee with, what direction to go with that. I'm happy to give that some thought and come up with some more concrete proposals before our next meeting, but would be interested in thoughts and directions. And similarly, I guess another question would be on schools. So Paul, Mike, and I are going to meet with the school finance folks on Friday morning. In Sherborn, I think historically there's been a reluctance to push too hard on school budgets, since top quality schools are a very important feature of Sherborn and why people move here. So I'd also be interested in the sense of committee on, any guidance that you would offer to Paul, Mike, and me for when we have this conversation with the school folks on Friday. Sean made, the very valid point that school budgets are going up a lot, and in an environment where we're diminishing excess levy capacity and approaching Prop 2.5 limits, that puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the budget, and that's a really big challenge. So I wanted to just, we don't need to go on endlessly, it's already 9:40. But I would be interested in any kind of sentiment from committee members for how people would suggest proceeding on school budget issues. Again, we're pushing back on all the things I want to add, but would be interested in people's sense of how hard to push on that. And then also on this question of, do we just want to keep working our way through budgets, or do we want to try to do something that's more systemic than that? So I'd open the floor for thoughts, reactions. And I understand that, thoughts and reactions may not be 100% completely well formed, but I'm trying to get a sense of what people are thinking, because that would help guide me in sort of, where to go and how to take things. Paul.
Right. One thing, like looking at the guidance we had put together before, it was, please, we asked kind of department heads to look at possibilities for cost saving, organizational changes, or budget reductions, is what our wording was. It seems like now the message maybe for Jeremy and others is that given the state of the budget and how we've shrunk our excess capacity, we should push back and encourage budget owners to sort of look at areas where they might be able to spend less than maybe level services, like in a way that still provides the essential services, something to that effect. Because that seems like the sort of things that we're going to try to do for the overall budget. So maybe that something like that might be a good message for Jeremy to bring back to others.
Other sense of how other people are feeling around those issues? I mean, this is I'm trying to think through the challenge of how to go from the sentiments that I think many of us expressed of, being uncomfortable with the situation we're in, to how do we want to operationalize that, and what do we want to have happen as a result of that? Penn, go ahead.
Right. So thank you. So I would, your two questions were, do we need to be more systemic, and what about schools? And I agree with Paul. I think as I, echoing what I said earlier, I think we should be looking at things systemically. And with the schools, I don't know. I think we should be prepared to push the schools, because there has been kind of a hands-off, the schools are the schools attitude. And, absolutely, schools are important. People move to Sherborn for the schools, but they're asking for big jumps. And I think that before we say yes to those, at the very least, we should really know what those are and how much of those are avoidable. Because my understanding, for example, is they're asking the towns to replace money that they got during and for COVID, which were, my understanding, were new funds to them. Now they've added that spending to their budget. That money, that revenue has disappeared. So now they want us to fill in for something that was kind of a bonus in the first place. There are questions like that I think really need to be asked and need to be answered. And I take Sean's point very much to mind. There's a sense that we get to look hard at everything except the schools, and they give us a number, and we can kind of bang at them a little bit. There may be, I think we should find out. I think we should walk into it with the assumption that they needed to identify their needs, adjust their needs, in accordance with what we're looking at, what our guidance is. Because, yeah, in theory, there's always more money to be had, but there's always a consequence to getting that more money. And we're seeing some of those consequences, and we're facing others.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just I think I said this before, but just to emphasize the point, on the school budgets, they have presented budgets, and Paul and Mike and I were at the meetings where they did that, and they, when the business manager presented to the school committees, and it's each document's a 1/4 inch thick, 30 pages, 40 pages of material. And the school budgeting is very different than the rest of municipal budgeting. So I think on the what are they asking for that's new? I mean, that's in those documents. That's there, and those are very much the items that we're I think pushing back on. There's also an item that I think we're going to push on, which is they have something called excess and deficiency, which is their term for free cash, and I think we all think they can manage that in a way that would be more advantageous for the towns, and would ask the towns to be paying smaller amount in taxes. One of the challenges, not so much with Pine Hill, but with the region, is if Dover says, which historically they have, we're happy to spend whatever the school committees want, and Sherborn says we don't want to spend that much, then there's this kind of standoff, and it just, it becomes a much more complicated governance problem than, like, in the case of Pine Hill, where pretty much the town is in control of the school and the budget. So anyways, just background. Yeah, Penn.
But it sounds like sort of historically what we've done in a number of fronts, and so Sean talked about some of them, we've talked about some of them. There's the history of the towns, the history of town meetings, there's the history of advisory. But it sounds like we have people, our predecessors have ducked some fights and ducked some difficult questions and ducked some difficult decisions. And
I think people have fought with the schools. I don't,
Okay.
I don't think it'd be fair to say that people have, that our predecessors have ducked that. I think it's a big, messy, opaque thing.
Okay, thank you.
But I think people have fought pretty hard on that in the past.
Okay, so that's actually good to hear. So my apologies for misspeaking there.
Can I just go back to, and if I understand it, just the simple math equation here. I mean, the schools is its own issue, but the town government's growing 4%. With insurance and retirement, that's higher than that. So the town's growing over 4. School's growing 8. If we cut it in half, it's still 4, north of 4. Yep. So that's still higher.
And we won't be able to cut it in half.
But yeah, but it's north of 4. The levy is 2.5. Though without new growth, those numbers eventually we run into a problem, right?
That's exactly right, and that's what we're facing.
So flat funding and 3.5% salary increase is just not feasible. Again, the schools is its own issue, but that's not we can't do that in perpetuity at the current status with the current set of circumstances.
Yeah,
the curves will cross and we'll have a problem, whether it's this year or next year or the year after, it's going to be a problem. And so I think the question is, do you change course now, or we just recognize that this is going to be a main topic next year or the year after? I mean, it's an inevitable situation at the current rate.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. Particularly since I think given school contractual agreement and state mandates, that's why I mentioned that, those numbers aren't going to come down in half, because even if they said we're going to do nothing but meet the contractual arrangements with teachers and satisfy state mandates, it would still be a big number. So I think what you said is a very good summary, that, we're on a path that is going to lead to a Prop 2.5 crunch. And one approach would be the select board would decide, go to the voters and ask for an override.
Yeah.
And other towns, I think, are facing the same set of circumstances because the high inflation has hit every town, not just us. So Mike, so given that really nice summary of the situation, what's your kind of feeling, instinct for how as a committee we should best manage that and respond?
Well, I mean, going, I don't know, this is my first time doing this, but going department by department and trying to ask questions and push back, I think we've given guidance of flat budgets. They've largely done that. And so we can ask questions, but unless we give guidance differently and ask them to go out and find cuts, whether defer things or whatever it be, I mean, it's somewhat pushing on a string here. I mean, I don't think we're going to have much success, because the people who are putting these budgets together actually know where money may or may not be. And so with flat guidance and that's what we asked, and that's what they did. So I think we either have to change course or just do things totally, just recognize that this is going to be an issue next year.
Yeah, next year or the year after. I think that's right. Wasim, go ahead.
So it's okay to brainstorm here. Again, regionalization, and maybe we'll put $1 million or multi-million dollars with appropriate funds to develop lots and make them into mansions and sell them. Right?
I thought you were going to say take $1 million and buy lottery tickets, but
no, I mean, so this is one aspect maybe that I don't have a good understanding. in town, it's probably the fact that, relatively speaking, for developers, purchasing a lot in Sherborn, building it, and selling it is not as attractive as other towns, again, because of our tax rates, right? So, you know, if developers are not going to do this, does it make sense for us to do this, right? We'll still make money, not as much return on investment as developers do, but it's still attractive return, and it is actually good for the town, right? So, think about, actually us developing the town or whoever, right? Developing and building these high-end homes. You'll increase, that'll add significantly to new development. And, if something, eventually that will actually do this feedback loop that Eric was referring to earlier, right? So it's a positive feedback now instead of the negative feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Wasim.
Wasim, I'm just going to piggyback right on that. That's exactly what I was going to be, in lieu of revenue not coming in. And how we have revenue is thoughtful development. And I think that I'm so glad Eric is on here, and I think it's not just our tax rate, but it's the whole process of building. And, it's the Board of Health, it's conservation, it's going through all the machinations of building that makes it more complex for a builder. Let's see, it's easier in other towns than it is in Sherborn for the most part to build. And I would say even for additions and whatnot. But I do think that thoughtful, revenue, and that's what we ultimately need right now. It's quite apparent.
And, if the Coolidge Street projects do come to fruition, that's likely to provide a little bit of help here too, but that's a ways down the road, even if it happens.
And you have to think, the other piece I wanted to bring up, just for final thoughts, going back to Eric, Dover has mostly 1 acre lots for the most part. We're really fortunate. We have large, people, it's great that we have mostly, 2+ acre lots, 3+ acre lots. There aren't that many 1 acre lots in Sherborn. And so it's nice to have that land. So I would think we would be able to, even for people that, the ADUs, for example, we talked about last time. Yes, we have it on the books, but is it really that feasible to do an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, to help offset some of, the tax burden and increase values too? I don't think it really is that easy to just put it in. We have to deal with septics and wells and whatnot. But anyway, thanks, Wasim.
Okay, thanks, Nora. Okay, so that's helpful, I think, and just for all of us to kind of have any shared perspectives. I'll give anybody one last chance, and then I have just one last thing before we wrap up.
And I'm sorry if I chime back in. Did I mention regionalization at the beginning of my comment or not?
You did.
Just wanted to make sure that didn't get going.
So the one specific question I wanted to ask is about meeting dates. If we do want to add an extra meeting to maybe split up the big departments and have a bit more time to dig into them, would people like to have a meeting on January 31? Add that. It's a Wednesday, so it'd be the typical time. Does that seem like good idea, worth doing? I'm asking because if we're going to do that, it's important for me to soon let budget makers know here's the new schedule, so people can kind of plan appropriately that they would need to be there that night and get the schedules in everybody's hands. Anybody? All right, let's just do a quick show of hands. Who would be up for meeting on January 31 and adding that? Who would like to do that? Who would prefer not to? Anybody? Okay, so let's add that. We'll do a January 31 meeting. So just as a preview, right, next 2 weeks from tonight, we do COA, rec, library, select board, legal, information technology, insurance inspectors, elder housing, zoning board, farm pond conservation commission, sustainability planning board, board of health. And then we'll split up on January 31, police, fire, DPW, and maybe pull a couple of those January 24th things. And then February 14th is our meeting on schools. And Jeremy will get those budgets copied. I will send them around. If people have inclination to dig into those, that would be great, because that's a big meeting, lots of people. And historically, the school liaisons have been the ones who've spoken up more, but if more of us have familiarity with the details of the budget and can really kind of substantively engage in that conversation, I think we will have more success in getting our view across. And then later in February and early March, we have a couple meetings to talk about specific warrant articles. But in terms of budget stuff, it's what I just described. So we'll add a January 31 meeting. Does that all sound good to everybody? Any other schedule changes that anybody would recommend?
What are the meetings after that?
So we're going to add the January 31 meeting. We have the February 7th meeting, February 14th meeting with the schools. Sadly, on Valentine's Day, I noted that for them when they put out their schedule, and they assured me there was no alternative. So that's a little bit, maybe a little complicated for some folks. Then we have a February 28th meeting and a March 6th meeting to talk about warrant articles, where the folks proposing warrant articles other than the budget will come up then. March 16th is our public hearing, and then town meeting scheduled for April 23rd. And I would just note that when we do the budgets, particularly for fire, police, and DPW, we will also be hearing about their capital budgets, because that's the time they'll talk to us about what they want to do there. And we'll have the benefit of capital budget committee's input on that. So that's the plan going forward. Okay, if everybody else is as tired as I am, I would welcome a motion to adjourn, unless there's something else anybody has.
I move to adjourn.
Thanks, Natalie. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Yeah.
I like that anxiousness second. Yeah, I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired as well. All right, so a roll call. Nora.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
Shelley.
Aye.
Natalie.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
Mike F. That was an aye?
Aye, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Wasim?
Aye.
And I'm aye as well, so that gets us 9-0 to adjourn. Okay, thanks, everybody. I know that was a long meeting, but I think it was a very valuable conversation to have. So next meeting, January 24th, I'm sure there'll be a lot of other side conversations, and I'll be talking to Jeremy and others over the next couple of weeks to help think about how we want to handle things going forward. So thanks, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.